Good afternoon, and welcome to a 29th edition of Klugula Reads His Classics, where I bring you writings that have been in my head since 10 years old and beyond. This particular piece today is from college. It wasn't meant for a writing course, it was just something I felt like writing. So, there you go. This one was written age 20, age 21, somewhere in there, and it is entitled The Subway and the Fat Lady. So let's jump right in, shall we? He had calluses on his right hand and not on his left. She noticed this and brought it out into the open so that she might begin a discussion. They were on the subway, making their way to the next stop. She was going to work, and he was going somewhere. Do you jerk off much? She motioned to his right hand. What? He looked at her, smiled, and looked away in embarrassment. Do you jerk off a lot? Your hand is all calloused. She grabbed his hand and pointed to the multiple calluses on it. Excuse me, don't touch me. He pulled his hand away from her and examined it carefully. After he eyed each inch of his hand thoroughly, he was confident that she had done no permanent damage. He rested his hand back onto his lap. Now I'll let you touch yourself. She turned back to the front and let out a deep sigh. He pulled out a handkerchief from his pocket and began to itch his nose with it. She watched him do this and then began to laugh. She covered her mouth and began to shake. She snorted once or twice and then began to calm down a bit. He simply finished with his nose and then stared at her in disbelief. She was now gazing off into the distance and nodding as each light in the subway went by. She looked back to the man, who continued to stare at her. Hi, she said. He watched for a moment longer, and then turned away. He stuffed the handkerchief back into his pocket and turned back to the front, shaking his head. There was a long silence. Why did you laugh a minute ago? All I did was itch my nose. He did not turn to her, but continued to face forward. Excuse me? Were you speaking to me? She pointed to herself, then to him, and then to herself again, reminding him of an actor friend he used to know. His hand gestures were never quite good enough to pass by unnoticed. They were always so unnatural and very distracting. He watched her out of the corner of his eye. She continued to make the same gestures over and over, only she chose to do them without the accompaniment of words. It's not important. He turned to her and smiled again. She smiled back, and there was another long silence. He fiddled with a knob of material on the inside of his suit jacket. He began to pull on it. It started to reveal itself as a wad of thread with attachments that kept the material together. He messed with it for some time. She watched him piddle around with something inside his suit jacket. He became more and more involved as time went on. What you doing? She leaned over and tried to see what was in the suit jacket and why it was gathering his attention. Nothing. Nothing that should concern you. He pulled the jacket tight around him so as to keep her from seeing what he was doing. Oh. She turned back to the front, and there was another long silence. She looked around the subway car. Over in the corner there was a fat lady and a small child. They were both staring at her and the man she had tried to make conversation with. She smiled at the people and then turned back to the man she sat with. She nudged his elbow. He pulled his arm away, making sure it was not within striking distance. He didn't look at her. Look. She nudged him again, keeping the fat lady and the kid in sight from the corner of her eye. He turned to her sharply so that he might tell her to leave him alone. At the same moment she was going to turn to him to make sure she got his attention about the fat kid and the lady. They bonked their heads and squealed in pain. He punched her in the shoulder as he held his head with his other hand. What did you do that for? She held her head in both hands and kicked him, making certain that she hit him as hard as he hit her. Why, you... He began kicking her and yelling at her. I can't believe you're being so childish. She screamed at him and then began to kick back. They sat there, almost on their backs, kicking one another and screaming obscenities back and forth. After a few minutes they stopped. The fat lady and the kid were laughing. The fat lady was chewing on a candy bar. As she laughed, chunks of the chocolate fell from her mouth. The kid laughed along with the fat lady, and during the fuss, picked his nose several times and ate the boogers he found. The man and the woman realized what they were doing. They were both on their backs, completely, and had their legs high in the air. They had their hands on their heads and were almost falling off of the seats. They both looked to the fat lady and the kid and smiled. They both sat up and retook their positions in their seats. The end of part one. There was no part two. As far as I ever recall, nothing was ever continued, but perhaps it might be interesting to follow up and see what happened to these particular characters. But anyway, that was a piece written in college, so probably age 20, and the subway and the fat lady. Return tomorrow for episode number 30. We are at an honest to goodness month, unless you count 28 days in a February. But anyway, until tomorrow, I will do the quadruple S. Stay secure, stay smart, stay safe, and stay well stocked. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.